So welcome to the Global Discussion, discussions with creatives, leaders and thinkers. I'm delighted to be joined today by Frank Prendergast. You're very welcome to the podcast, Frank, and let's begin by asking you to introduce yourself to our international audience. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're involved in.
Lovely. Yeah, so thanks a million for inviting me on, and really good to meet you properly. And I'm Frank. I work with my wife, Marci. We're easy to find because we've called ourselves Frank and Marci, so it's easy to remember. And we're digital marketers. We work with solopreneurs and small businesses, and we help them to rise above the blah and basically use their online presence to grow their business. So that's kind of the nutshell. I'm Irish. We live in Cork, but I'm actually chatting to you right now from Kentucky because that's where Marci's from. So we do try and split our time if we can between the two places, especially after a grueling lockdown.
Yeah, and do you know what? I don't know what it is, but Frank and Marci, it really works as a brand name. There's something really nice about it. I love it. And
thank you.
Tell me a bit about the personal brand Firestarter and how that fits into this Frank and Marci brand.
Yeah, so the personal brand Firestarter, it's really interesting. I was looking back over the global interview and the written interview we did, and you'd asked me what my favorite social media platform was, and I said Facebook, and then I gave a kind of an honorable mention to LinkedIn. And since then, I have completely ported over to LinkedIn, and I've abandoned Facebook and Instagram. For my own personal presence. I just felt like I really found my tribe on LinkedIn and found a great sense of community there, and also found it great for the business. And so I thought, you know what? I think there's still a lot of people they see LinkedIn as a kind of a stuffy business formal place. And I mean, my LinkedIn persona, I've got a talking moustache on LinkedIn. So it's only as stuffy and formal as you make it. And so I put together the personal brand Firestarter to basically help people to create content on LinkedIn that would help them rise above the blah, that would resonate more with people and also with their dream clients or customers.
Yeah, and you've said that phrase a few times, this rising above the blah, this cutting through the noise, which I suppose in this always on connected digital world, it's busy, it's noisy, it's ever changing. And so you're really helping people to cut through, including your own, the moustache missives. Is that right? Which
That's
is
right.
Sort of the persona on LinkedIn, yeah. I think. Yeah. Yeah. So when you're thinking about the work that you do, and you say you predominantly focus on sort of the smaller business area, if I'm right in saying that, the sort of solopreneur you were mentioning there a moment ago. But how are you helping? Because the smaller the company, sometimes they don't have the resources necessarily. They don't have the reach. Maybe they're at the beginning of their sort of business building steps. How do you help companies like that break through? How does Frank and Marci help somebody like that, or help a small organization like that? Because it's not easy, and it's quite lonely, some people have said, when you're in that position.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of what we do comes down to strategy. And I think when you're working on your own, if you're a solopreneur, and so if you're a small business, a lot of the time, your time is a huge issue, and you're being bombarded constantly with all of these different, marketing techniques, marketing tools, marketing platforms. And it just, what we find a lot of the time is people are just doing like a bit of this, 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 no idea what's working. And there's no kind of through line that's actually making the whole thing make sense. And so what we do is we have four steps that we take people through, and we call it define, align, shine, amplify. So we define the brand, which is like the foundations for everything that comes afterwards. And a lot of people have not done the groundwork of defining the brand so that they really know what they need to be communicating. So that's vital. And then we align their online presence. That's bringing it into alignment with the brand definition, which includes the customer journey. So a lot of our brand definition focuses, yes, it focuses on the person or the company, but it really focuses on who they serve and what they offer them. And so we bring their online presence into alignment with the brand, which includes basically the customer journey. So we're making sure that there's a journey somebody goes on from never having heard of you right through to getting to know you, getting to know what you do, getting to know your services, and finally actually wanting to work with you. Then we help them shine through their content. So that's where we help people to create their own content. So we do a certain amount of content creation, but we also try and empower people to just create better content themselves that will help them to rise above the blah. And then the final part is amplify their message. And so there's, again, there's a couple of different angles to that. One is paid ads. We're a big fan of Facebook ads. And then there's other things like, like this, like I'm doing now, hopping on podcasts and amplifying the message that way. And, getting exposed to other people's audiences, whether it's Instagram lives or LinkedIn collaborations or, there's or guest blog posts. There's a lot of different ways you can amplify your message once you have all the other pieces in place.
So it sounds like from this sort of stepped approach, when you're working with a company, you're sort of defining it, you're aligning it. Shine, I think, was the next one, and then the amplification that you were just talking about. So to me, this feels like it's a real wrap. It's a consultancy almost, as opposed to a short-term investment. Would I be right in saying that? Is it like because you're not just creating the content, you're helping them, making sure that it gets that cut through, that amplification, and that it resonates with who they are, because you've done that work up front.
Yeah, we try and work with clients over a number of months, because it is quite a holistic approach, really. So we try and work with clients over a couple of months, and then a lot of the time we have a lot of clients who then become long-term clients, and then but we also you mentioned the personal brand fire starter earlier, so we also do want to have offerings for people who aren't ready for that level of investment, or just aren't at that place yet as a business. So the personal brand fire starter is a way to help people to shine through their content, but without taking on a number of months of work with us. So the personal brand fire starter is like a 6-week one-to-one program.
And can I ask you just to step on that question a little bit deeper, if I can? There's a lot of people who maybe they're not, I know it's not necessarily a target audience, but they may not be business owners, or they may not ever start a company. But I'm seeing more and more people, particularly within the corporate environment, who are being encouraged to create their own brand identity, because it adds that human element to their corporate story or their corporate message. And I suppose it's a double-edged sword, because obviously a corporation or a medium to large company doesn't necessarily want to build itself around individuals per se. I mean, outside of the board or the CEO's messages or something. But have you had any sort of insights into that, or any thoughts into the importance of a personal brand, whether you are a small entrepreneurial company, or whether you're maybe part of a much larger organization?
I would say I'm a big believer in the personal brand, and so I would definitely say, from a personal perspective, even if you're working in a huge corporation, for you personally, it's vital. If you want, I suppose it's vital if you are the ambitious type, and if you want to. And I also do think, like, for the corporations, it would be the smart thing to do personally. But I'm bound to say that because I am one of the reasons we work with solopreneurs and small businesses is because, I started to find myself at one point on track to work in larger companies. And I found myself working in a startup, fantastic company, brilliant people, just not for me. And so at some point I realized, okay, I've gone down the wrong path, and I need to I need to go out on my own. I need to be my own boss, and I need to do things my way. And so I suppose my passion in what I do is actually serving people a bit like me, who have actually decided, no, that's not for me. I don't want that 9 to 5. I don't want that larger organization. So that's who I love helping. Do I still think it's important for people in large corporations? And do I think it would serve large corporations? I do, but it's not where my experience or my passion lies.
How do you split that sort of work between Frank and Marci? Like, who looks after what elements, or is it pretty much a shared sort of approach to when you work with these companies?
We're both very strategic minded. So we both get involved in the overall strategy, and we have we have these fantastic like strategy planning sessions that we are both heavily involved in. And then I would be more, I suppose I would be kind of a mixture of big picture, some of the more technical stuff, and some of the more where we do get involved in design and things like that. That would be where I get involved as well. And then Marci is the copywriter and messaging strategist.
And who's responsible for the blog? Because I love some of the green images that you've been using on the blog. Who writes the blog?
Yeah, so at the moment, I mean, we both do, but those green images are actually mostly, I think, on my posts at the moment. So I've mostly been posting on the blog, and Marci has mostly been communicating with our email list, and that's just at the moment. So I think Marci will be coming back and doing more blogging, and I will be coming back and communicating with the email list a bit more. But right now, those green images are actually the result of some experimentation with artificial intelligence image generators, because I do have a design background, but I was just finding I was spending a ridiculous amount of time putting together even like one image for the header of the blog. And then I still had this like wall of text in the blog post. So I started playing around with image generators and figuring out, like, can they be used, effectively right now for small businesses? And that's what I have figured out, is how to do those on brand, using our brand colors, doing these very simple editorial illustrations through Midjourney is the tool I use. And it allows me to really quickly come up with, I could come up with 10 images in 15 minutes using those tools, as opposed to hours and hours and hours in Photoshop myself.
Yeah, it's very interesting, isn't it? The whole AI area, whether it's DALL-E 2 or there's lots of, there's a few options out there now, but it talks back to what you were mentioning a moment ago. It really cuts through on your blog because they're unique. And I know the art world's in a bit of turmoil between what is art now, with AI starting to replicate or use, I suppose, data to pull together new images, if you put new in inverted commas, I suppose. But also, one of your recent posts was around the advanced sort of chat GPT and the way that written content is changing. Have you any sort of views on that? Is the human always going to be involved, or have you found that to be as good as maybe some of the image generation stuff?
It's definitely getting there. I think still think there's probably another leap to be made before it's quite as incredible as I found Midjourney. However, I think that probably depends a little bit as well on how you train the artificial intelligence. So I was listening to a guy, and unfortunately I've forgotten his name, but it was on Mark Schaefer's podcast. And his guest was saying that he asked it to write a blog post, and what it came back with was good. I mean, incredible for artificial intelligence, but it was nothing that he would post. He wouldn't have taken ownership of it because the style was wrong. It was a little bit pedestrian. But he then changed the prompt, and he asked it to write the same article in his voice. And because there's so much of his material online, presumably the artificial intelligence was able to emulate his voice, and that's when he was blown away. Now, I'm not sure that I have, I don't think I have that presence online yet, that ChatGPT is able to emulate my voice, because I've tried that and it did not work.
I heard a similar one actually with Malcolm Gladwell, the author, where they asked, he wasn't him doing it, but they asked for, I think they asked for a particular article and then asked it to write it in the style of Malcolm Gladwell. And because, as you were saying, so much of his content is out there already, the AI was able to quickly put that into a Malcolm Gladwell-esque style article. And, reading it, it kind of felt a bit, it sort of delivered. So I think it's definitely improving, yeah.
Yeah, and I think, you asked about the, will there always need to be a human involvement? And that is just a fascinating question. And I'd say we could spend hours diving into that. But I will say that I do find it just fascinating to think about, I wrote that post about ChatGPT, and I wrote it about my struggle in writing a headline. So, an artificial intelligence is never going to be able to write about an actual true human struggle. However, they're probably going to get absolutely fantastic at writing fictional human struggles. And then that begs the question of, does that matter? So if you're writing business content and you're wrapping it up in story, does it matter that it's true? This is fascinating. If it's giving across the lesson, if it's given, if it's giving across the actual value, it's going to be fascinating to see how much do we value the actual human blood, sweat, and tears that goes into something, rather than the actual output itself. So we may get to a point where AI is doing amazing and fantastic things. Humans are doing much less amazing things, but we value them much more because of the human blood, sweat, and tears that went into them.
I was talking to Angus Blair very recently, and Angus, big corporate financial background and heavily involved in sustainability and ESG now. But he said, I was asking him what he likes to read, and he was talking about, authors where he's sort of diving into this topic around what is reality now. And I don't want to get sucked down that rabbit hole, because, as you say, we could talk about this for days on end. But I do think a lot of the AI data sets, I think, are only coming up to 2021 in some cases. But it is incredible when you think about that wealth of knowledge that they're able to scrape, pull together, use algorithms to regurgitate, if that's probably not too bad a word to throw in there. But the outputs are, you use the word pedestrian, I think that they're quite good. They're okay. They're acceptable. I wouldn't say they're exceptional yet, but it is changing rapidly, isn't it, Frank? So we'll keep
absolutely. Yeah, I think there's going to be more, huge leaps very quickly. So it's fascinating. It's incredible, and it's a little bit terrifying too.
I agree. I totally agree. Well, look, before we wrap up today, because I want to ask you a couple of quicker questions if I can, and just maybe get some initial feedback from you. And I'm trying to ask people that are on the podcast about books, titles, authors, things that they like to read or have read, or anything they'd like to recommend. So do you have anything like that? Is it magazines, books? Is it papers? Is it downloadable content? Or where do you find yourself spending your time?
Business books. I devour business books. I just love them. I have no idea when it happened, but at some point I stopped reading fiction, and I feel like I need to get back and broaden my horizons again a little bit more. But I do read a lot of business books, and I've actually whittled down 5 that I recommend, almost like a marketing masterclass for any small business who really wants to propel things forward. And they are: This is Marketing by Seth Godin, which I think of as kind of the setting the foundations for like the philosophy of modern marketing. And so that's where I would tell anyone to start. Then there's the One-Page Marketing Plan by Alan Dibb. That is more the kind of the nuts and bolts, the practical, because This is Marketing won't tell you exactly what to do, but it'll tell you how to approach everything. The One-Page Marketing Plan gets into the nuts and bolts and kind of goes through all of the different things you need to keep an eye on in your marketing as a small business. Then I would say Building a Story Brand by Donald Miller is a really good read. that is a really good addition, I think, to your brand definition, because it deals a little bit with brand definition and what should and shouldn't be in your messaging. Particularly useful when thinking about your website. So that's another really good read. Then I would broaden things out again a tiny bit, and I would read The Science of Story by Will Storr, just to get an idea of why everyone talks about storytelling and why it's so important and how it actually works and how you can start to kind of utilize some storytelling tools. And then the last book is more specifically for solopreneurs, and that would be Mark Schaefer's book, Known. And yeah, that's a fantastic blueprint for building a personal brand. And then I'll give an honorable mention to next year, sometime I think around the summer, myself and Marci will have a chapter in a book which is titled The Most Amazing Marketing Book Ever by Mark Schaefer and Friends. So watch out for that as well, because that will be an amazing book.
That sounds like a compendium that's a must-have for the bookshelf, I think. Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, absolutely, because it's written by over 34 members of Mark Schaefer's community, all marketing experts. Yeah, it's going to be incredible.
Sounds great. And thanks very much for sharing those books with our audience today, because there's a couple there that I have read. I'm looking at them here in my bookshelf out of the corner of my eye.
Cool.
There's a couple there that I haven't read, so I'll add them to my reading list. So thanks very much for sharing those, Frank. I do appreciate it.
Brilliant.
When you look back at your career, whether they're in sort of the marketing world, I know you've been an actor, which we haven't even touched on for quite a while. Is there any people that you admire or you've looked up to or have inspired you along the way that you want to share with us?
I always find this question so difficult because there's so many, basically. So I'm a huge fan of David Byrne. So just in the creative realm, David Byrne, I think his ability to find this beauty and such creativity in the mundane, and kind of he explodes the infinity of the universe in these like really small human moments of being alive. So a fantastic kind of almost non-linear storyteller. So yeah, huge admiration. And then kind of personally in my own life, I mean, Marci admire hugely, and she really like keeps us on track. I think I'm kind of I'm a very much a kind of a multivariate. I mean, you mentioned the acting and there's the marketing. And so Marci has an incredible laser focus that keeps us on track, which I hugely admire. My brother, we wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for my brother. Even just when I started in art college, which is where I started off studying fine art, and then before I moved into design. And he said to me, look, if you want to be an artist, fantastic, but take every computer class that's going, because at the time, the internet was just arriving in Ireland. And he said, yeah, you know, art, fantastic, but learn computer skills. And that was only one piece of golden advice of all the things he said to me over the years. So yeah, there's so many people. I'm going to mention my mum as well. She has over lockdown, which was a really tough time. And obviously my parents are older, and so there was even more concern, and they were in an even kind of greater lockdown than the rest of us for parts of it. And my mum still managed over that time to be involved in shooting a documentary, play a role in a short film, which was in the Cork Film Festival, and be involved in poetry readings with the local theatre company online. So yeah, incredible. And I could just go on and on. That's why I find this question so difficult.
Well, that's wonderful. That's wonderful that your mother was able to do those during the pandemic. That's great. And what about your own acting? We touched on it there briefly. You're still treading the boards? Are you still involved in the acting?
I am. Yeah, I am, absolutely. And it's been fascinating to me. You know, I used to have this kind of wall between my marketing work and my acting work. And a couple of years ago, I worked with a coach, a friend of mine, and he basically said, you've got to tear that wall down because it's actually exhausting you, almost kind of like having to climb over that wall every time you switch hats. And I was like, you know, that is absolutely true. And I tore down that wall and was amazed at the parallels between the two worlds, and how, how much there is to learn from the acting world about building a personal brand. And I don't mean in any way in terms of kind of like pretending anything. I mean the fact that actors are always searching for the truth in something. And so there's a saying by Sanford Meisner that acting is living truthfully under imaginary circumstances. And I think that building a personal brand is all about living truthfully under digital circumstances. So they're both very similar, because you stand, basically, in both cases, you're essentially standing on a stage. It's just one is digital, and one is an actual stage. And we as humans, that's not a natural environment for us. And so we freeze up and we become stilted, and we don't actually know how to really communicate the truth of who we are. And so, so the parallels between the two have been incredible. And I do very much still act. Yeah.
It's wonderful. It is wonderful. And it's amazing how those things, the things that you've maybe tried purposely to keep apart for so long are actually complementary, really.
Yeah.
So incredible. Well, continued success in the acting. I think you're 12, 13 odd years or more with the acting. And of course, from the brother's advice of, listen, do the art, but get onto this computer thing, because you're sort of art to AI now. So it's all sort of coming together. And I think that was wonderful. So thanks for sharing that. What about advice that you've been given along the way, Frank? Is there any sort of advice that you'd share, or something somebody may have said to you, but you know what, if they hadn't have said that, I wouldn't have been able to achieve X, Y, Z?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think there's so many. I mean, I mentioned my brother saying about the computer skills, and then I mentioned about the coach who was saying, you've got to get rid of that wall. Great advice. And then I think I was telling you before about my friend Emmett O'Neill, who we had a chat a couple of years ago, and he was saying to me, look, you're good at a lot of things, but you've got to stop doing things because you can do them, and really start driving forward on the things that you love. And that was really good advice. And at the time when he said it, I actually momentarily kind of thought, oh, I think that means I need to chase the acting. I need to go after the acting because that's what I love. But as I did that, I realized that it actually wasn't the acting itself. It was the interaction with people. Because at the time, a lot of my digital marketing work was, I was building a lot of websites, and I was working on my own, and I was kind of, off in my office, a bit like you said previously about, a lot of people mentioned that it can be a very lonely endeavor. And so I realized that actually it wasn't necessarily the acting. I do love the acting. I'm very much a multivariate or multi-hyphenate or whatever term you want to use for it. But it was actually the interaction with people. And so I refocused a lot of my work to actually be working one-to-one with people and working with clients, as opposed to just taking a raft of work from someone and going off into the office. So that was really good advice, which once I figured out what those things were properly, which took a while, proved to be absolutely invaluable advice.
That's wonderful. Thanks, Frank, for sharing that. So look, we're kind of coming towards the end now, and I just wanted to wrap up with maybe asking you what 2023 looks like. What are you passionate about at the moment? And is there anything that we haven't touched on that you'd like to share with our audience today?
Yeah, so 2023, I'm excited about 2023 because I have an acting project lined up, and we have a great new client lined up. So 2023 is shaping up to be essentially my dream existence of balancing those worlds and living life very much the way that I want to, as opposed to any kind of standard template, or I mentioned earlier about my dislike for the kind of 9 to 5 and that kind of strict structure. So I'm very excited about 2023 from that perspective. And then in terms of things, we haven't touched upon to share, I suppose I don't know why this is on my mind, but I think, you know, through the pandemic, and I suppose really we're kind of still in it, really, aren't we? We've just kind of put it to one side a little bit. I don't know if you found this, but I've never had a great relationship with time. But I found that pandemic really messed with that a lot. And I found that, you know, time has really been racing since the pandemic. And Marci started doing something. I think she just started doing it naturally. And then it just became this habit of, at the end of the day, she would just say to me, what were the highlights of your day? And at first I was kind of stumped, and I'd be like, I don't even know if I remember the day. So the question then prompted me to run back over the day and look for those moments that I had just really enjoyed. And it could just be something really simple, like, you know what, when we took that break at 11, sat down, had that coffee and chatted about whatever, that was a highlight. And for me, you know, unless I actually stop and think about those things, they just get lost. The big ones obviously stick in your mind, but the little ones just evaporate. So that has been something that I have found really useful for slowing down time a little bit, and also appreciating, you know, even just the most standard days, or the frantic days, just having that moment to go, you know what, there were highlights.
It's fascinating, Frank, as an observation, because I think at the beginning of the pandemic, or even as we were going through it, a lot of people I talked to a lot of people in lots of different countries. And I think when the commute dropped out for a lot of people stopped going to offices, they stopped going to events, they stopped going on holiday. And that getting back that time, that commute, being able to have more time maybe with family or loved ones, I think that was really valued by people. But I also felt, me personally, and I know this has happened for some people, not all people, but they found themselves getting busier and busier. And I know it's a good complaint. If you're in a business that's doing really well during a pandemic, then you're doing better than maybe somebody in an area or sector that really struggled during the pandemic. So I am grateful for it, but it was probably one of the busiest periods, and still is, and it's very, very busy. So I really like your observation there about being able to stop and reflect and think about that on a more regular basis, because it is difficult for all of us to control that time, or to at least try to have some level of mastery. Whether that's possible or not, I'm not sure, but at least, you know, rather than it just all becoming a blur because we're all just busy all the time. So yeah, it's a great one to end on. Thank you, Frank. Well, look, that brings us nicely to the end of this episode of the Global Discussion. I'd like to thank Frank Prendergast for joining me today on this episode. And of course, if you're watching or listening to this episode, make sure you like, subscribe, and share it, because that's what we'd like you to do. So thanks very much indeed. And please do make sure to join us again for more global discussions with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. Thank you so much, Frank. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Frank.